Okay, welcome to another YouTube tutorial. Um, it's Sunday, 9 a.m. So this will be the first painting tutorial of the day. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Miss Mary, who has been commenting on the tutorial number 50 and sharing a lot of information about pigments and pigment numbers. She, started a conversation about she had different Payne's Grays on hand from different brands, and was talking about the different pigments that were used by the different companies, and essentially bringing to light that if you're using expensive brands, you can minimize your spending by mixing your own Payne's Gray. So, Miss Mary, I really appreciate you leaving those comments and sharing that information. And I encourage all y'all to please comment and ask questions, start conversations in the chats and down below and things like that. So I think it's a really great way for us all to learn and to all share our knowledge with it. That being said, of course, there's a whole bunch of different Facebook pages where people share their information. There's a whole bunch of different websites where people will share their information. Wet Canvas is one of them. That's a forum, and they have like a lot of different sections for the different types of arts. There's Facebook pages. I like Rick's Facebook page. He's a watercolor painter who does some great videos online, and he's somebody I'd watched when I first started. A lot of people post on there. Watercolor Sketchers, that has a big variety of people from different types of like painting styles. I like posting there as well. I also like Watercolor Tips and Techniques, where people, with their post has to share a technique or a tip or something like that, and that starts some really interesting things. And it's very quick, scrolling through to see what's going on. And some people will either post a photo progression of their painting, which is, oh my god, it's amazing, some of the stuff that people do on there. It's so great. This one lady, I don't know her name off the top of my head, but had done a bridge painting and posted throughout, each photo with a comment and what she had done and whatnot, and was like in real time answering questions that people had as she posted them. So that's another good Facebook page. And then my favorite, of course, is the Ron Ranson Disciples. That's one of the longest running Facebook groups I've ever been just active in. They're a great community of people. Everybody uses like Hake brushes and simplified palettes, and we have people that have been painting for years on there, and we have people that are just starting. And I say we because I'm really involved on it. I'm kind of a moderator on it, but it's mainly just to say, hey, make sure you stay within the guidelines and you're polite, stuff like that. But nobody's ever really disrespectful on there, so it's a great community. Yeah, so once again, so especially in what's going on worldwide, where people are feeling stuck at home and whatnot, this is like the best time to be painting and to be learning and to experimenting, because there's a few things you got to take care of, and painting satisfies a lot for me. I think mentally. And if you watch my other videos, you know that I coach powerlifting, and that that has a lot, you know, what I need, you know, physically, you know, health-wise and things like that. So, you know, painting and art and reading, leisure stuff like that, but seems like leisure stuff is very good for your mind. Okay, so with all that rambling done, I did my setup on my palette, and usually we kind of talk through the setup, but you know, doing things a little bit differently. So we wet the quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. This is 11 by 15. It's torn to fit underneath a 11 by 14 opening in a mat if this was to be put on display somewhere. I found very early on that it was very helpful to standardize the sizes that I worked with, especially if they're going to go underneath mats. And I've been sitting on this size lately. It's just been easy for me to tear it to this size and just to paint with the Hake brush. So this is what I've fallen into. Prior to this, I did a lot of 8 by 10. I also did a lot of 5 by 7. But this is where I've been very comfortable with. Painting wise, so far, like I said, it's early in the morning. I don't have any plans for this one. Something did spark my mind when I was talking about the different Facebook pages, and I talked about a lady who had done a bridge. I'm thinking that I'll do a bridge in the style of Steve Cronin. He's was a huge influence on me painting, him and Dave Usher, and that's what led me into the Hake and then that Ron Ranson group. And so yeah, so those are kind of stone bridges that he would paint, and I'll kind of do something along those lines. How does that sound? So let's see. We'll start off with like yesterday's. Start off with a little bit of alizarin, then a little bit of raw sienna, and then we'll go a little bit of ultramarine. I'm gonna have a little bit of water, and I think we're gonna go very green colored with this one, but we're gonna have a waterway, a bridge right in here, I think, and we'll do a whole bunch of trees. I think most of the sky and whatnot will be covered up. This will probably harken back to paintings that I did over a year ago when I was, you know, learning from those painters that I had mentioned. So this is just raw sienna, just kind of blocking in some shapes, getting some ideas. Looks very fresh and green, fresh and raw sienna right now, but I think we might really darken things up a bit and kind of do a big forest scene with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rigger and I'm going to start mixing a dark, like a Payne's gray type dark, ultramarine, burnt sienna, just something like that, a gray. And I'm going to just start throwing in these wet and wet trees. I think this is also a technique that I learned from the Stephen Cronin videos. I'm kind of tempted now to maybe name this one like in honor of Stephen Cronin, but then I don't want people to be like, oh, is he dead? Like, no, I'm just, doing a shout out to him and, thanking him for everything that I learned from him. So we'll see. He actively posts videos. He also has produced some books. So that's really cool. So that's something somebody to definitely check out. And chances are, if you're watching me, you probably have seen Stephen Cronin. So I'm just doing these with that hake just coming up. And then starting to form these areas. With the wet and wet, you can really push things around and shape it and see how you want things to go. I think that was a conversation me and Miss Margaret were having, where we were both having difficulty just forming this region on a previous painting, where, like me in the video, I was just thinking how to recover it, and she was thinking about the shape as well. And she was asking about, or talking about recovering or fixing things in paintings. I found that sometimes I almost wind up grasping a paper towel a lot in this hand to kind of wipe and swipe. And I feel like that's reminiscent of when I did some charcoal drawings in the later stages of college, while I was doing my alternative certification for teaching. And in the charcoal drawings, it was additive and subtractive, where we'd put the cross hatching in and then come back in and erase some and just go back and forth. I noticed I've been splattering pigment often on these paintings lately. It's not something I'm meaning to do, but I don't know if that's a sign that I'm going back and forth quicker and quicker and becoming more, I guess, laissez-faire with how things touch the paper. I'm not sure if that's a positive thing or not, but we'll see. So with this, we put this initial layer of trees in, and we're really not going to see much of it. It's just that layering, but it helps us build the what's taking place here in the wet and wet stage. I've grown accustomed to taking my various pigments and feeding them in. Here's some burnt sienna. At this stage, I'll sometimes mix my darks and think, okay, I'm gonna probably have some trees right in here, so let me get that diffusion, softness taking place. I know that I'm gonna have my reflections coming down the wet and wet stage. So I can play around with all these things and utilize this diffusion that takes place. One lady was speaking about how you can do like a gentle super re-wetting of the whole painting. And this was, I think, in regards to a time lapse that I'd done about just experimenting with taking a glaze or a wash where I dried everything off and I took some alizarin and just went over it. And well, anyway, so she was saying taking a gentle wetting of the whole paper and then I think pouring in a mixture of paint. I'm not quite sure what she was talking about, but it sounded really cool and really interesting. So that might be something we'll try to figure out what she was doing. So this is just, like I said, putting in the ideas where things are going to be grounded in the next stages. We could also do some scraping and whatnot if we want to. And then we'll do a dry off and we'll start putting in the next stuff. We can put rocks. Maybe still a little too wet for it. So we'll see. All right, so let's do a dry off and we'll go to the next stage. If you have earbuds on, just watch out. Oh, somebody is in the live chat right now. Is that thing you use to make trees a two-haired brush? I've never seen that tool. I use a rigger. This is a number 1 rigger, and this is a hake brush. This is Ron Ranson hake brush. You can find it online. This one was bought from Cheap Joe's Art Stuff. Also, Pro Art makes it, where it's a hake brush, which is a Japanese Chinese style brush. However, the end of it is pre-worn to its chiseled shape to allow more painting rather than just putting washes in. All right, so let's dry this off real quick. Alright, so that was our first wet stage. I believe we still have areas that are semi-wet. Shouldn't be too big of an issue. As you can see, the wet and wet, you can utilize it to really create foggy effects if we had wanted to stay in that line. And we saw that with some of yesterday's paintings. So with this, we're still working in the far distance coming forward. So we're going to want a mixture of our grays. And we're essentially going to put in that same tree line that we had put in. This time we'll play around with some foliage. It'll get dried and this stuff will have another layer over the top of it. It's just building the illusion and creating a landscape that we have back here. We could take the wet rigger with watered down paint like this and do the shapes of trees back here rather than just the trunks. We can start modeling things out like this, and you have a far distant tree. We could have another one come out over this in that fashion as well, and that creates that illusion of the depth. And that's just using the side of the rigger, just tapping it really quick with these. And like I said, this one is kind of a tribute to what I learned from Stephen Cronin. If I remember correctly, when he built up in this fashion, you could come off of these and start thinking about the trunks, the branches, etc. So we're just going across. And I think, yeah, I'd said I wanted to put a bridge in this one, so once I get across with this, we'll put a bridge, pun intended. That's the thing, you know, like I said, being a school teacher and being out for a month because of all this, who's going to hear all my corny jokes? Y'all are. Y'all are going to get inundated with a whole bunch of these silly jokes. Okay. Now, we could take the hake with these guys and put some semblance of the foliage in there. We want to keep it more up top. And maybe some at the base. But as we build up those layers, you know, this is going to get all built upon and covered. But we would like a little bit to be able to see through these trees as we layer on top of those as well. This is just putting it in. Start having the overhang take place. Okay. Now, like I said, we wanted a bridge in this one, so let's grab our burnt sienna, our ultramarine, Payne's gray. I'm just trying to mix it dark. It doesn't have to be mixed perfectly because we want a kind of variety of tones, colors in it. And this is going to be just a bridge coming up over like this. And if you want, you can continue it as a stone wall alongside. You could have a gap right here and continue and have those. In the end, when I had done a lot of these bridges, I put little figures on them, and it'd be, you know, just like a fun little thing where people were, you know, standing and watching and looking out over. Now you could take a card and start pulling that wet paint, do a variety of shapes, and this will give the illusion of it being created from stones. Apparently these stone bridges are common in Europe, and I think they call them, I don't know if they call them fairy bridges or devil bridges, because they seem to defy logic with how they're built. At the time when I was painting them, I was just like looking them up. You can take a mix, and since we're looking from this direction, we're going to see a little bit of that underside of it. This is just Payne's gray mixed darkened. We'll probably come back and touch up on some of this. You could also just take this, mix with some water, and start getting that reflection and shadow happening. Also for backlit, start setting that in place too. Yeah, and we'll play around with this in a bit. We'll come back. So, these trees, they're still a little damp. You could do a dry off at this point if you wanted to. You don't have to. We could also have now thicker, closer trees. And with thicker, closer trees, what we talked about yesterday, the perspective of trees is where they're the base of them are sitting. Farther away, you're only going to have a small drop, but then as we get closer, we're going to have a huge drop, and that's to a proportion taking place with perspective. So you can use the hake or the rigger. This is kind of up to you. What you want to do, and what's very easy to happen, is to fall into the same shape for the trees. Feel free to leave gaps. Like here, we could come in and then put some foliage down there. Get the foliage up on top. But get a variety taking place. I'm just using that dark mix as well still. I could have just could have started using the lemon yellow for a green, or a sap green, or a mixture with the sap and the raw sienna. And you see how this is starting to layer on top of those back trees. Have some more growth down below them. You could take the rigger. You could start, adding more branches. You could have smaller, thinner growths coming up. Just the one thing is, we don't want to be at our maximum pigment load right now, meaning we don't want it super, super dark, because we need to be able to do the other layers on top of this, and those super darks will help push these further back and help create that illusion of depth. When I woke up this morning and I was flipping through Facebook, one of my favorite Facebook pages is the Tonalism Facebook page, and I like to share my artwork on there. We don't have huge artwork discussions. It's just more of like an art movement. That's and I talk about tonalist in other videos, I think. Anyway, when I woke up, the moderator shares a lot from a Russian painter from the late 1800s. And, I was looking at that painting that he had shared, and I didn't think of it as a painting at all. Even though it's not like super uber realistic or anything like that. It's just that the creation of depth that I just got sucked into. And then I tried to change the way my eyes were kind of looking at it to view it as a textured surface. And then I could start seeing how he had taken some texture here and had the smaller texture as it receded back. And I was able to kind of view it as the painterly tricks that the painter did in order to create that. But it was just so phenomenal, and it was a lot of fun waking up to that and getting stuck into that view in that world and having that happen. So let's do a dry off. We'll do our next layer. So I'm thinking the base of the tree line, and this is, like I had said, here we have this. Here we're going to get a little bit lower. It'll be about here. So we're going to have that gap in the trees. If we want, we could take raw sienna or lemon yellow. Kind of just could have just took the dry brush if I didn't have my hake already kind of loaded. And this is raw sienna. Just to illuminate that path a little bit. We're going to wind up going over it. I'm going to have to dry it because there we go. Let's do this next layer. So we're definitely in the hake mode. I'm gonna mix. I grabbed a whole bunch of light red, Venetian red. Did not mean to do that, but I like going with the flow with whatever pigment's on the brush. See if I could pick up something to darken it. Okay, mixing Payne's Gray in. There we go. Hey, maybe this will be like a really viable dark for us to use. Because the Venetian red is so pigmented, use the Payne's Gray to push it on the dark side, or use maybe a burnt umber or a phthalo blue. It has that red in to warm it up and move it closer. You see how I did that split tree design twice? And that's what I mean by us having to make sure we don't do too repetitive of tree shapes. We could have them leaning to the left, to the right. Put some growth down amongst them. Now we're going to start dealing with these bigger reflections. I'm going to have to either take a wet rigger to kind of just spread that and diffuse that. And we'll get back to that later on. Now, let's see. We'll have one more guy come up. We'll use the rigger for tree branches. We can use the hake for our foliage. I could also start varying this tone up a bit, and I will in a moment. Oh, sorry, this color. And we can scrape for texture in these trees as well. Let's see. Get some texture variety in these trunks. Scrape a little bit out in these trees. I'll grab some Payne's Gray on the outer sides to darken these. Oh, big old splatter of paint. Grab some of our mix for branches. And you don't have to follow the branch all the way up. You can have it weave in and out. And that creates not really a layer, but it creates the illusion of a layer being there. Because the layers are there, you're having to create it in one pass. It's like stuff going up in front. I'm going to be careful with the crisscrossing. That's a big thing in in Chinese art. The way things cross and how they intersect, you need to be careful with that. This is just me utilizing Payne's Gray mixed into that Venetian red that I just got all over the palette. I don't know if it's me being frugal or what, but just rolling with the flow. And with this rigger, we could bring down some reflections. And I have a feeling that we're going to keep on bringing down reflections and then pass over them, which will help kind of blend everything together. And while we're down here, let's get some of this Payne's Gray a little bit stronger along these edges. Let's see. Let's grab raw sienna into this mix. A bit of color variation down in here. Payne's Gray, a little bit darker. You'll notice that I don't clean the brush that often. Let's raw sienna. We don't have to cover the whole thing. That's just another kind of textural effect as well. I believe we have to do a dry off at this point. Put a little bit of that back there. One thing to consider is, the tree line that I've been talking about. As you get closer, you can have a variation in the tree line more. It is, for far distant objects, it's going to seem to create a line. As it comes closer, it's going to have an up and down motion. And at a stage like this, we could have a tree here, 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 kind of just that, as if there's no straight line taking place. All Alright, just mixing Payne's Gray with burnt umber, raw sienna. A little too watery, but it's okay. Okay. Have a little bit of warping taking place. Okay, so let's really, I guess, let the word be gussy up. Is that appropriate? Gussy up the trees, make them all nice and fancy. Just really give them life. We can really have fun with the rigor here. It really is coming out to be like a fall winter scene. That's why I've been avoiding lemon yellow or sap green. But part of me really wants to put some sap green vines on it, but I don't think we'll be allowed to do that with this one. Actually, I could really, let's try to get this dark. You can really bring this guy up and over and have him really make an impact. And he has offshoots coming down from down here. He is going to get his own shadow reflection. And he has the shadow at his base. We could take the same approach with this other guy. And I hope this was a good demonstration on depth that takes place in a looking within a forest. And I think it's safe to assume we would get so much light coming through for an autumn winter type scene due to all of the foliage. One thing we'll have to do is approach this, and this is an imaginary scene. One thing we'll have to do is eventually approach it in a with a lot of greenery. Use the rigger for a little bit of growth down here. You could bring a few of the reflections down. We can take and get some, I'm gonna try to get a blackish foliage. So Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray and the ultramarine. And a little bit of burnt. We're really gonna have to do a tutorial on that triad. I'm just aggressively smashing this just to get that splayed pattern out. Also, this is just a very light mix that I'm going to do. I'll show turn in that bend. Am I getting that effect? I'm gonna look at it through the camera to get a different view. It does seem like we're able to get that effect and have that's too warm, that color. I mean, it's too brownish red. So we need more of a gray purple. Give the illusion that that turn in that bank has taken place. I feel like I have to do this to help unify that. I think that did help. Excuse me. Bring a little bit of reflections down. Solidify this a little bit more. You could go in and put textures up here. You take the rigger, and things are wet, so I just gotta be careful. You could put a couple up there. See how that's still wet and just feeding in different tones. Let's see. So at this point, it's pretty much done. I believe we're done with the foliage. We could intersperse a few more branches and whatnot. And now it's just a moment of kind of tickling and playing around, adding reflections in water if we want, kind of get more variety down here. We do have an overhang of the trees, so there is going to be a reflection and a shadow over this. You could wet areas and scrape out rocks in that fashion. What else can you do with this one? If you have light buff Titan, you can highlights on the trees. You could even do that with the raw sienna. Let's say, all right, so let's say we have the light coming through and kind of catch some portions of it. If you want to get a little bit of variety and pop some things out a little bit more. What else can you do? I haven't done this scene in quite a while. Like I said, this harkens back to almost a year ago for me. Something like this. It's a made-up scene, but every time I would paint it, would paint in the same logic, more or less. So it was pretty fun. Getting old school. We'll do a dry off and we'll sign it. I don't know if I did my spiel about, a whole bunch of links down below, and like, subscribe, comments, and feel free to follow along. Let me see your results. I'm curious how you all do. I'm sure you all do great. I put these paintings up for sale on Etsy, so if you're ever interested in purchasing one, check it out. Or just click the link and give my Etsy a follow if you don't mind. I don't know if that affects any algorithms for them, but it'd be kind of cool, having some more followers on there. I also have the Patreon account, but I do some exclusive content for that, but still building that, still working on that. So I think we're done at this point. Let's dry off and sign, and then let's see. Alright. I'm going to sign with the jelly roll. Okay, so we'll look right about that. We got ye old jelly roll. Where do we want to sign? All right, there you go. There's the finished product, and I'll see you soon with another tutorial.